Hey gang, it's Wayne from the Hymer Group. How you doing? Just recently had an issue with my van where my batteries weren't charging up when I started the motor up with my Underhood generator and Balmar. So I was able to follow the Balmar troubleshooting guide, very simple troubleshooting guide, some simple techniques that actually helped me pinpoint the problem and move towards a resolution. So I just want to kind of share those techniques and what Balmar recommends, and hopefully maybe it helps you in the field someday, or hopefully you never have the problem. And if you do, at least to give you something as a reference to look at. Let's take a look at what we've got here. I've got two batteries running here. This is the KS2 display, but it'd be similar if you didn't just had the standard EcoTrack systems. Notice here there's 0 amps of charge current. I've got the motor running, so something's going on. These batteries aren't charging. I can tell that through the intelligent battery display. But if you just have a standard EcoTrack configuration, you can see here the battery voltage itself doesn't increase with the motor running and the underhood generator running. So we know we have an issue. So let's go through the steps on troubleshooting this problem to see if we can find out what's going on, and we'll follow the Balmar guide. Okay, first step of the guide is to start with your batteries in a known good state so that you know your batteries yourself are not the problem that's why they're not charging. So to do that, I guess there's a couple quick recommendations. One was turn everything off, turn your ignition off, turn both your EcoTrack batteries off. And why we want to do that is there is protection in the KS2 lithium batteries with a charge contactor that will open up when your batteries are fully charged. On some systems, like the L1 batteries, this contactor won't close to allow the batteries to charge until it's actually reset. Because the timer doesn't work like it does on some of the H batteries and kind of later generations of the Ls. So what you want to do is go to a minimum configurations that we can use for testing, so we don't make it too complex. So in this case, we're going to turn one battery on. I'm going to connect to the house here so that I can see my voltage reading if I don't have the KS2 monitor. And to be safe, I'll reset my battery as well. And that way I know that I'm in a known good state. I can see there's voltage on my battery here on the display. I can see that both the discharge and charge contactor are closed. So this battery's in a known condition and it's available to accept charge. So, that could be a good first troubleshooting step for you. It could just be that your batteries need to be reset. And, if you're driving down the road and they're not charging, it could just be the fact that your charge contactor is open and needs to be reset to charge those batteries. So now we've got a known state of the batteries. My ignition's off, and then we can kind of go into the next phase of the troubleshooting technique as per the Balmar guide. Okay, as for the next step, I'm going to turn everything off. Ignition is off. I'm going to turn my batteries off. My battery that I had on here as well. I'll turn that off. And we're doing that so at this stage we can kind of do a step-by-step troubleshooting process for the Balmar and Underhood generator. And the first step they want is, basically for you to check the cable connections going to the Balmar itself and the Underhood generator and the fuses. This is just a little safer. We don't have any electricity going through to the Balmar, either from the engine battery with the ignition on and from the house batteries here with the lithium coach batteries turned off. Okay, we're on step 2 of the process now, where Balamr says that the vast majority of the failures and why you're not getting charging for your lithium batteries is usually due to corrosion and poor cable connections or brokered cable connections. So they suggest checking the connections at the Balmar itself to look for corrosion. This can really happen if your Balmar is down in the wheel well because it's exposed more to salt and other corrosives down in there that spray up from your wheels, especially if you live in a winter climate. I've got my Balmar installed up here in the engine bay, which is a little more protected, but at the same time, these connections will corrode over time, so it's important to check them. So you can start with the main wiring harness at the top first. It just pulls off. This isn't a technical job, anyone can do it. Flip these over and you can see these little gold connectors in here. And all the connectors, you're looking for a nice clean gold color. If they're really green, almost think of a copper roof that's gone corroded, how green those are when you see church steeples that are corroded and everything. You want to clean that up and get that green corrosive off there with some fine sandpaper and blow that all out. And then also put some dielectric grease like I have here, which prevents future corrosion, kind of keeps the water out of the connections. Also check these little terminals on the Balmar itself to make sure that they're nice and clean and not corroded or broken. Check to make sure that there's not any broken wires here. And as well, you'll see these individual wires, the 3 individual wires, 2 reds and a black. Pull these off one at a time. Take careful note of their location when you pull them off. Take a look at the actual connections themselves to make sure that they're not corroded. Make sure they go on there nice and tight. Check the terminals themselves to make sure they're not corroded. Do them one at a time. Put them all back on. Replace everything here. You can also run down, if you have a friend or a buddy, you can actually put one end, and I'll show you how to use a multimeter here to check continuity now, but you can check to make sure that the cable harness itself is not disconnected or a broken wire or something from the Balamr down to the Underhood generator. You would put one lead of your multimeter down at the Underhood generator side of the cable harness, and then one up here in the Balamr side, and then take a look at the ohm meter to make sure that there's not a broken connection on that wiring harness. So eliminating the wiring harness and corrosion can be a very common problem and a very easy step for anyone to do, and the first step to kind of in the troubleshooting process. Next step that Balamr recommends is there are 2 fuses. There's a 10 amp fuse and a 1 amp fuse. I'm just going to swing the camera over here so we can see these a little bit better. See, these little plastic connectors, protective connectors, are covering up the 10 amp fuse and the 1 amp fuse, and they should be to the left hand side of your Balamr if your Balmar's configured like this. Might be slightly different location, but you should be able to find these 2 fuses. So Balamr says this is the second most common issue that of charge and not charging. I've actually had this happen to myself. Very common for this 1 amp fuse to blow. Some people have actually removed it and placed a slightly higher rated fuse. I'd have to check and see what what some people have recommended on that. I do have the 1 amp in mine. But I did have it blow the first 2 months we have the van, and was able to kind of resolve that by using this troubleshooting guide. So to test the fuses, I'll show you very simply a manual technique, and then I strongly recommend a multimeter, and I'll show you how to test them with a multimeter as well. There's little clips here on these little plastic protective hoods that are covering the fuse. So to get at the fuses themselves, all you do is lift this little connector, pull the hood off, and then I'll expose this automotive type fuse that you may have seen in your car, or you have these similar fuses in your van. I strongly recommend carrying extra fuses, and certainly the 10 and 1 amp are ones that you should be carrying. This one here is the 10 amp. To remove the fuse, just pull it out. And if you look closely at the fuse, it's kind of hard to focus here. This one looks to be intact. The metal wire in the center of the fuse itself doesn't appear to be broken. So if I didn't have a meter, I could do this visual inspection. It's not 100%, but certainty, but it gives you a pretty good idea of whether the fuse is blown or not. And then I'll show you how to check these on a meter as well. Similar to the 1 amp fuse, remove the protective cover, pull the fuse out, and then we can do a visual inspection here. And in this case, the wire looks solid as well, which tells me that this fuse is good visually, and I'll show you how to double check them with a multimeter. Okay, this is a common multimeter. This is what I find to be one of the most useful tools that I have in my van, and it's extremely handy to troubleshoot any electrical issues, whether you're looking at whether fuses are blowing, if there's a short connection in wiring, if there's an issue with your lighting, if your USB ports. Very helpful tool. And in this case, to look at fuses and wiring continuity to make sure that they are good, we're going to use the ohm setting. If you take a look here, the OHM setting on the actual meter. I'll put it to the lowest setting, which on my meter is 200 ohms. And we're going to use the leads on the meter itself to test the fuse. Okay, so I've taken the 2 leads of my multimeter, the red and black lead. I've connected them to the 2 legs of the fuse. and I'm getting a reading around 0.1 ohm here. So this fuse is intact, it's connected. If it was burnt out and basically the fuse was blown, I'd have an open connection on this fuse, and I can simulate that by dropping this lead, and you can see it going to 1, which signifies infinite resistance here. It's just too many numbers, so it goes to the last digit 1, and that tells me that this fuse is blown. So very easy to check with a multimeter, anyone can do it. So I'm checking, in this case, what are we looking at here? The 10 amp fuse. And next, you just want to do the same with your 1 amp fuse and check and make sure both fuses are good. This one's good. I did check the other fuse as well. It's good. So we know that the issue here so far is not the wiring harness itself on the Balmar or the connections or the fuses, so we can go on to the next stage of the troubleshooting. And what I will do is put these fuses back in. It's a very simple process. Plug them back into the little connector here. And then I'll put my little covers back on and clip them in. Okay, so for the next stage, we're going to use our handy dandy multimeter that everyone should have, but in this case, we're going to move from measuring resistance or ohms to measuring voltage and DC voltage. In this case, the voltage will range anywhere from 0 volts up to, probably 14 volts that we're testing. So I'm going to move my meter setting here to volts, 20 volts. And now I'm ready to actually start testing voltage here. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to take my black lead of my multimeter. I'm going to put it on the black lead of my wiring harness. And then I'm going to take my red lead of my multimeter and put it on the red lead of the wiring harness. And this wire actually is the voltage, get it on here good, of our EcoTrack batteries and AGM batteries. So this is doing two things. This is telling me the connection between the Balmar and the EcoTrack batteries is good, and it's sensing the voltage at 13.4. If I had a 0 volt reading here with the EcoTracks on, there's no way to charge them because there's no connection between the Balmar, and the Balmar doesn't know how much current to apply because it doesn't know the voltage of the battery. So that tells me something's going on between the connection between the Balamr and the batteries. Something that we got to look in and troubleshoot. So next step is they want you to measure the voltage between the ground, the black, and the brown wire. And the brown wire is the ignition wire that provides the power for the Balamr. If you notice, the Balamr has no display now. It's powered off. The ignition is off. That makes sense. So because the ignition's off, I should see 0 volts here on the brown wire, which I do. And the next thing they ask you to measure is the voltage on this blue wire, which is the field wire, which is used to control the current to the actual underhood generator itself. And because I have the ignition off here and there's no power to the Balmar, you should also have a 0 volt reading here, which we do. The other one thing that they want you to measure is the voltage to the red wire down here, which is also, and just be careful here not to kind of short out between the pins, but you'll see here is also at the 13 volts. So that tells me that my Balmar, everything has worked on this stage of the testing. I've got 0 volts where I should. I've got the 13 volts for the EcoTrack batteries on the volt sense wires. So we're good to move on to the second stage of the testing, or third stage of the testing. Alrighty, next stage of the testing, what we're going to do is we have the EcoTrack batteries on. Now the difference is we've also turned the ignition key just to the ignition stop on the vehicle itself to turn on the engine battery. But we haven't started the van, and you can't see in this shot, but what you'll see is the LED display in the Balmar is now cycling through, and we'll talk about that in the advanced troubleshooting, what that can show you. But this is the next stage of what Balmar wants to do for troubleshooting. So we're going to go back to our voltmeter again. It's set up, and now we're going to measure some voltages, and we'll take a look again. We start with the black and red wire in the top of the harness, and you'll see 13 volts. We're going to move to the brown wire, and we'll see that actually now we're getting 12 volts there. That's the ignition wire. So that tells me my Balamr is getting seeing electricity and voltage from my Ecotrax, but it's also getting power from my engine battery, hence the display and why the Balamr is actually now working cycling. Okay, my last reading is on my field wire, which is between my black and my blue, and I should have 11 volts between, I think, 3 and 11 volts, which I do have in this case. The last thing I'm going to measure is between pin 9, the red wire in the bottom. It's kind of hard to see here in the black. I got my meter kind of out of the way here so I can get at this measurement, but you'll see a reading here of 13 volts as well, the battery voltage, and it's same as the top reading. So everything looks good at this stage. Now we can move on to the next stage of the troubleshooting. Okay, so with the engine running, in my initial test when I did it myself, what I was finding was everything kind of worked out for the guide, but the voltage between the black and blue wire, which is the field wire, was measuring 0. So that told me there was an issue somewhere between the Balamr or an issue with the Underhood generator itself, because there's no field coming back to control the current to the actual Underhood generator itself. So that kind of led me to go under the van and start looking at the Underhood generator to see if it's working, and I can show you what I found. It's really hard to see, but there's a little connector that connects the blue wire, the field wire, the Balmar, into the Underhood generator. There used to be a white stratter wire there that I had removed that had been a fire hazard. But I think just through motion abrasion, and there wasn't even really any shrink wrap on the connection, this wire is exposed. So anyway, I ended up unplugging the connector out of the Underhood generator, reseating, plugging it in, and all of a sudden it started to charge again. I'm going to have to pull that connector out and probably basically reconnect that wire and shrink wrap that to make sure that it works properly. But once I did that, I can go in and show you that I was able to kind of actually get the Underhood generator working. The other areas that they suggest checking is this alternator belt. It looks like it's running, or the belt for the Underhood generator, it's running smoothly, and there's actually a test that you can use. I didn't do it because I didn't have to perform it, but there's a test you can do with a screwdriver while it's running to see if it's magnetic. Might be a little tricky to get that in there while that's rotating, but that will tell you whether there's a magnetic field for the alternator itself, and a quick test to see if the Underhood generator is somewhat working. So anyway, that test was able to save me to pinpoint the problem, and was able to resolve my issue. So hopefully that helps you in the future. Okay, after addressing the wiring issue with the blue sense wire that was going down to the Underhood generator, you can see now that we're charging with the Underhood generator temporarily here, and then I'm going to do a permanent fix on that connector and get that kind of properly shrink wrapped and fixed up. Hope this helps you in the future, and hopefully you never need this information and you have great luck with charging with your Underhood generator.